Okay, seems to be a few of you are still a little bit scared to come here. Anyway, welcome. It's the first day of the 23rd Chaos Communication Congress here in Berlin. This is room 3, evening talks. We will start off with Atul Chitnis, who will tell us about a lot about what's happening in India. I hear he has prepared 70 slides. So I'll make it short. There's a page on him in the wiki if you need more information about him. But there's lots of information about him You will probably see him in online mailing lists and everything. I think that's about it. I think also if you have questions in German, that's fine. I hear he does understand German quite a lot, and he's actually born here and grew up in Berlin. Is that right? So I guess without further much ado, this is one small issue. You still need a mic? You don't have one? Could we have a mic there? So the angel of audio is coming up with a mic. So that's great. Atul, over to you.
Okay. Is on? Okay, cool. Okay, good evening. My name is Atul Chitnis, and I come from Bangalore, India. Bangalore is a name that scares a lot of people, usually in the US, but I believe people are not so scared of that name here in Germany. Nobody has been Bangalored as such over here. Okay, what I do is among other things, work on a lot of things, mobile computing, open source. I'll just quickly mention this. This is a company I work for, which you probably hear of in the future as well. I just want to mention them because it's thanks to my company that I can come to events like this, because they sponsor me to go to all sorts of events where I would like to talk, and nothing about the company. So what I don't do is, I don't write code. I write people. And I've been doing it for the past more than a dozen years. I'm going to take you through a quick history of what we have been doing in terms of free and open source software in India, what the current status is over there, what our successes have been, what our failures have been, and what I hope to see in the future. Some of this might seem very familiar to you, which is a good thing, because then you realize that things are happening in India very much like they are in the rest of the world. Some of these will seem very unfamiliar to you, which is also a good thing, because you realize then that things are not always the same all over the place. So this is the sequence I'm going to take. I'm going to talk about what happened then, what's happening now. I'm going to talk about successes, failures, and then some of the innovations. So let's start with then. I came into the picture as far as India is concerned in 1989. I had been developing communication software for many years. And in 1989, I brought India's first BBS online, which was called CIX, no relation to the CIX system in the UK, which was called the Cyber Information Exchange. Why this is important is because eventually it was this BBS that furthered my interest in Linux. Because of the work that I was doing with BBSs, and since ours was the only online system in the whole country, okay, now we're talking about, at that time, something like about 900 million people, and they had precisely one online system available to them, and that was my lowly little single-line BBS, which created quite a problem for me because so many people wanted to dial in. Over the years, I tried many ways of getting a multi-line BBS going, and I tried several of them. I eventually wrote my own system because none of the systems that were available could do what I wanted it to do. In the process, I gained a lot of experience, a lot of heartache, and a lot of fun stuff related to the online world. And I started writing for this magazine called PC Quest. I started writing a column called Conversations for several years, in which I talked about getting online in India. Now, you got to understand how ludicrous this was to most people in those days. In the 1980s and the early 1990s, you could barely make a decent phone call, voice phone call in India. Data lines were virtually non-existent, and voice lines were so pathetic that sometimes you had to scream several times before you could make yourself heard on the other side. So here I was in 1993 writing a column dedicated to data communication in India. And of course, that raised a lot of interest. And there's a URL over there. You can go and read some of those articles over there. What happened is that in the process of developing software for getting people online, and because I needed a multi-user system, and because I was already very familiar with the whole concept of Unix, I actually own a legal copy of SCO Unix. Shame on me. And I actually ran that for quite a while, redeveloping my BBS software under SCO Unix, which wasn't so much of a success for a number of reasons. I mean, the SCO Unix thing that I had, for example, was a single license kind of, single user license kind of thing, which of course cramped my styles considerably. In 1994, I released a version of my BBS software which actually ran under Linux, and of course with that could do a whole lot of other things. I got in touch with Linux when I went and visited the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai, where a friend of mine actually thrust a tape into my hand and said, "Here, you got to check this out." So this was a tape. Now, I had never used a tape machine before. This was one of those large tapes, not one of those small, dainty little tapes you get for PCs. And I went back to Bangalore, and then I went to the Indian Institute of Science, and they then transferred it over to me on floppies, and that didn't work. By the end of 1994, I got my sister-in-law, who was in the US by then, to send me a stack of diskettes, which was my first working copy of Linux. And, okay, first working copy of Linux is a bit of an overstatement. I think it was diskette number 13 or 14 which gave me a read error. So I'm sure you're familiar with that situation. But I got involved with this. I really liked what I saw. It allowed me to do a whole lot of things that I couldn't do before. And like I said, the first thing I did was to port my software over to Linux, which worked great. But by then, of course, the internet had become so widespread. Even in India, by 1996, internet was publicly available, that it really didn't make much sense to run a BBS anymore when you had websites all over the place. What I did succeed in doing in 1996 was to get the magazine that I was writing for to put a copy of Linux onto the cover CD. Now, this was actually the second cover CD the magazine had ever brought out. The first cover CD had OS/2 Warp on it, which IBM actually gave official permission to distribute, and a last-ditch attempt to popularize it in India. And that didn't quite work. And the next one, in March 1996, had a copy of Slackware Linux on it, which was quite a story of its own, but I don't want to get too deep into that because we'll be sitting here all night then while I explain what happened over there. The important thing is that PC Quest, as a magazine, recognized the importance of Linux in those days and actually gave me and a bunch of friends full liberty to do a lot more than you would have normally expected. For example, we got the liberty to bring out 1 or 2 special CDs every year. We got to write a whole lot of articles. And over the years, we put out 1 million Linux CDs into the country, which, considering that there were just about 2 million PCs in the country at that time, was quite an effort. And was also quite successful because we started getting feedback from people who actually went and installed. We were surprised. We thought, I mean, no one is really actually going to go and install this, right? And then we started getting back, mail from people, letters, on paper, some handwritten, and saying that, okay, they installed it and they had some problems with this, and we ended up running the only Linux support center in the entire country. Impromptu, without getting paid for it or anything. It was great fun. More and more people pitched in, and so it was actually quite successful. Most of the questions were quite repetitive. For example, how do I get my data back after I formatted my hard disk? So it wasn't just about CDs. what we also could do was we could write comprehensive how-to articles. Now, the important thing about these articles, some of which you can go and have a look at online at pcquest.com/Linux, where how-to articles not in, how do you install Linux, or how do you do this, or how do you do that. But we wrote articles on how to set up an entire IT infrastructure using Linux. Complete your internal mail server, your DNS server, everything that you have to do to get online, how to get your entire company online. Then we wrote articles about using Linux on the desktop, and this is in the 1990s. And again, to our surprise, a whole lot of people started using that. So I actually ran this particular project, the PCQuest Linux project, for several years until 2001. And by the end of 2002, I really had other things to do as well. So by then, we had brought in a whole lot of other people who are continuing the project even as we speak today. So our target audience for these articles was not, it wasn't students, it wasn't individuals. It was typically small and medium enterprises, small companies. Because what was happening at that time was rather fortunate for us. It was around that time that Microsoft started sending faxes to people, ask them whether they've got legitimate software installed. And a whole lot of people started getting scared. There were a couple of raids here and there, so people got even more scared. So instead of going buying more Microsoft software, they were looking for alternatives. And there we were, by pure chance, writing articles, providing precisely that kind of alternative to them. So these small and medium enterprises started installing Linux to such a degree that in the end, somewhere around the year 2000, Microsoft actually ran a survey to find out which companies in India were not using any open source software. And they polled the top 500 companies in the country, largest downwards. And that report was never published because they couldn't find a single company that wasn't using Linux in some fashion or the other. I happen to know about this because at that time I was the contributing editor to PCQuest and I actually got to see the report. And of course I urged PCQuest to publish it. Unfortunately, Microsoft never allowed us to publish it. I don't know why. So the focus of our articles was on use. Now this is where probably things may go down the wrong way with a few people. The focus was on use, it was not on ideology. We never sat down and tried to explain to people the value of freedom. Now, there were two reasons for this. One thing is they were already aware of it to a great degree because they were just sitting over there getting faxes from Microsoft. The other one was that we knew that we could do one of two things. While the people who were actually involved in the project were very much clued into the whole concept of free software, about software freedom and the extended implications of all that, we had only so much bandwidth available to us in terms of publishing articles or talking to people that we could use. So what we used it for getting people to use Linux. This, unfortunately, has been a sore point with many people, even in India, for a long time, actually to this particular day. I'll get back to that in a little while. The other thing that happened during that time, and which we again played a major role in, was the rise of Linux user groups. The first Linux user group came up around in 96, beginning 97. In Chennai, then known as Madras. And because of the fact that Linux was now available freely, you remember there were people who didn't have dial-up modems of any sort. Forget about having broadband or anything of that sort. So there was no question about them downloading Linux and installing it. But because PCQuest was available on the newsstands, and twice a year, it would have a cover CD with the latest version of some version. We used Slackware Linux initially, but later switched to Red Hat Linux when it was still considered as a free distribution. And people could just take that and install that. And at least twice a year, they were guaranteed to get the latest and the greatest. And we kept publishing updates and security updates. So we acted like a de facto internet for many people. And because of this, there were a lot of people who actually started using it. A whole industry sprung up about coming in and installing. People used to charge 2,000 rupees to go and set up a mail server. Now, this was good pocket money for our students. And, I mean, we were only too happy to see that happen because, A, people were earning money with that, and B, they were getting more people into the fold. In no time at all, we had more and more people asking questions, so that's where the Linux user groups came into the picture. And they grew rather rapidly. Unlike in what I have seen in the US, for example, we went from almost nothing to thousands of Linux user groups in the country in a span of maybe a few months. Even the small, you couldn't go to a small city somewhere in some godforsaken place and not find a Linux user group over there, even if it was just 3 people. So A, it was very useful for the people around there, and B, it turned out to be pretty fashionable. So no shortage of Linux user groups at all. The focus of all the Linux user group, as with our articles, was on installation, administration, and using the systems. Again, since we did not focus too much on the whole concept of freedom, the Linux user groups also were more practical oriented. Huge number of mailing lists came into the picture. There was one set of mailing lists called the Linux India mailing list, which acted like a sort of a hub for all the other lugs in the country. And it wasn't a formal organization, it still isn't. But it sort of acted like an umbrella, something that people could first go to and then find out where's the nearest lug, or if there's no lug around here, then how does one get a lug started and all that. So there were a lot of the Linux India mailing list, and there were regional mailing lists, citywide mailing lists, sometimes duplicating the effort. But useful to a lot of people. The mailing lists that I run in Bangalore, which I've been running since somewhere around 2000, have got almost 10,000 members on the mailing list themselves, which sometimes creates quite a bit of chaos. So in 1999, we realized that despite everything that we were doing, we were not actually getting much attention, which was a pity. We had a lot of users out there, a lot of companies out there. We had a lot of people who understood that Linux was important to them and that they needed to use that. But if you looked at it from the countrywide perspective, we had no presence at all. Nobody knew anything about the Linux community. No one knew anything about Linux itself. If you look at it from the large, big picture perspective, like for example, from the government perspective, from the industry perspective, people were using Linux at the IT level, but they weren't, the top management wasn't aware of it. So it was a very, very chaotic kind of situation because it was self-limiting. We now found ourselves in a situation, no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't be heard. Now, what happened in 1999 is that there was this large event which took place every year in Bangalore called BangaloreIT.com. Now, BangaloreIT.com was at that time Asia's largest IT expo. And by sheer luck, which involved a whole lot of alcohol and a lot of pressure and a lot of social engineering, we actually got the organizers of BangaloreIT.com, which happened to be the government of Karnataka, the state of which Bangalore is the capital, to give us what we first asked for was we wanted to have a stall at that expo. But as I said, the wonders of alcohol and good friends in the right places, we ended up not with a stall, but with an entire pavilion. A huge area, which I would say is about 1.5 times the size of this room, and a little wider. Stalls on the left, stalls on the right, and right in the center, the Indian Linux user groups had an island, a huge place, where we were demonstrating Linux in every possible fashion, while along the sides were commercial Linux providers, Linux distribution guys, people who were providing services, some people who were giving the first few supercomputers, Beowulf clusters, etc. And it was this particular expo is memorable for us because the first thing that happened is we opened the newspapers on day 2. And the newspapers called us the crown jewel of BangaloreIT.com. This is what we see on the front page of the newspapers. From going from absolutely nowhere, where no one knew about the Linux community, to going to such a place, to the largest selling English newspaper in the country, and being on the front page of that and being said that we are the crown jewel of, you can imagine what happened the next day. So that day we got overrun. We had 150,000 people going through our stall in a span of 3 days. To a point that at one point, the organizers on the PA were announcing, ladies and gentlemen, there are other pavilions apart from the Linux pavilion. Please go and visit those too. The biggest irony was that one of these pavilions was the Microsoft pavilion. And an even bigger thing, especially as far as India is concerned, is that another one of the pavilions was the American Business Pavilion. Now, most people's dream was to go and work in the US. So we used to have these huge queues in the year before where people used to stand out there to give their resumes to whatever company was exhibiting inside that American pavilion. Those queues were now in our Linux pavilion. So we've got photographs, and if you go back to this particular page, linuxbangalore.org/blog/even/itcom99, there are photographs over there to prove what I'm talking about. You can see queues which snake all around the expo ground with all these huge pavilions over there, and all these people are waiting to get into the Linux pavilion. So that was a huge success for us. And for the first time, the industries took notice of us. The next year, we didn't have to go and beg and plead and get anyone drunk to get a stall. We got a huge area within the prime, in the main expo pavilion of the BangaloreIT.com in 2000. And it was equally successful. This time we had a whole lot more stuff going over there. We had people doing live Blender demos over there. We had supercomputers and clusters running over there and actually showing people the effect of using a cluster. Now, remember, this is around the time that the Titanic came out. So people in India actually got to see the kind of technology that was being used to render movies of that sort. We had applications running. We had people, running open what was at that time Star Office. And showing, applications being used in real. We invited people to come and play around with it. We didn't just exhibit. It was a touch and feel kind of situation. Very successful. Again, huge number of visitors. We have absolutely no clue how many people actually went through our pavilion at that time. So these three things, BangaloreIT.com 99 and 2000, plus another event called Bang Linux. Very strangely named event. Bang Linux was a commercial event. A commercial event about Linux. And it was one of those really weird kind of things because you had to spend a huge amount of money to attend that event, something like 10,000 rupees or something on those lines. We had Richard Stallman coming and speaking over there. People had to pay a huge amount of money to come and listen to Richard Stallman. And this was run by this company called ROX Publishing. And they obviously made a huge amount of it. It was actually the forerunner of what we call commercial Linux events today. Today you know them as Linux World Expo, LWE, and things like that. We actually participated in that event as well. And what we did at that event is we asked them, we don't want a stall, you give us a small hall. And we want to give talks about Linux, installing Linux and various things. And they actually, the organizers said, okay, cool, what will you guys do? So we had talks. And you can imagine what happens next when the Linux community, who actually knows a lot about Linux, runs talks over there. We had people coming out of the commercial talks and coming and sitting in our little hall and listening to our talks. So in the end, on the last day, we got thrown out of the place. We were basically curtly told, oh, this hall is required for something else, so you can't give any talks anymore over there. In effect, we were thrown out because we were basically interfering with the whole system. There was never another Bang Linux event after that, which is, again, more or less our fault. Basically, after we finished this event, Bang Linux 2001, we said this is enough. We don't want to piggyback anymore of other people. We want to have our own event. And so in 2001, end 2001, we had an event called Linux Bangalore 2001, which, as the name suggests, is about Linux and took place in Bangalore and in 2001. The URL is there for you to see. You can go and check out a lot of stuff over there, including what kind of talks we had, which were quite technical talks. Linux Bangalore 2001 was a big hit for us for several reasons. The people who came to that event came specifically because they wanted to learn more about Linux. And most of them were at the newbie level. So people came over there and they learned how to install Linux, and then they also learned a whole lot of other things. You can go and have a look at the list of talks on the site. You can go and have a look at the slides also, and the description of the talks to understand what all happened over there. Now, this was a very successful thing, so we repeated it the next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. You can go to each of the sites and go and have a look at what all we did over there. The problem was, by the time we reached 2004, we got really bored of the concept. Now, this was hard work. In 2001, when we did this event, we had something like 500 or, I don't know, 600, 700 people who came. By the time we reached 2004, we had 3,000 people attending an event on premises that would seat no more than 1,200. So you can imagine what kind of chaos that was. Feeding these people. On top of that, this was a low-cost event. We are charging people something, the equivalent of $10 for attending a 3-day event that included all their food for those 3 days. So basically, I mean, was not a commercial event. This is an event by the Linux community for people who are interested in Linux. So we decided to change the format. Now, there were two issues that we were facing. One was, the event had become too Linux specific. While most of us were not in it just because of Linux, because we were in it for free and open source software. And that was a lot more. I mean, free and open source software is not just Linux. There's a whole lot more stuff out there. So we wanted to make sure that people realized this and realized that our event was not just about Linux, but about the whole concept of FOSS. The second issue was that we initially started that event as what was known as a small regional event. By the time we reached 2004, 30% of our audience was from outside Bangalore. And a good chunk of that 30% that was from outside Bangalore was from outside India. We had speakers who were coming in from all over the world. Once upon a time, we had to fall at their feet and say, please come. In 2003, we had people writing into us saying, could I come and speak at your event? And we suddenly were dealing with something that was far bigger than we had imagined. So just calling it Linux Bangalore, when in reality we were catering to an entire country, okay, and had audiences and speakers coming from all over the world it was a bit off. So we needed to get rid of the region-specific name as well. And in end of 2004, when the event finished, I announced from the stage that this was the last Linux Bangalore, and that we would have a new name and a new scope the next year. And in July next year, in 2005, I announced a name which was called FOSS.in. Our name is our URL. Perfect. No one ever asked us, what is the URL of your website? And we continued the tradition of the /2005/2006. And FOSS.in 2005, this time was in a much larger premise. Instead of having it in a convention space, We actually had it on the grounds of the Bangalore Palace, which is a huge area, where we set up huge halls of our own. In fact, the entire size of our setup over there rivaled that of what BangaloreIT.com, which used to be on the same grounds, used to be in years before. So we had 3,000 attendees. We had close to 200 talks. We had 30 plus birds of feather sessions. These are the ones that we know about. Okay, there were a whole lot of things that are happening under the trees and sitting somewhere in the middle of the ground or around the coffee machine or whatever that we don't even know about. This was by all, we got a lot of press coverage. We had TV cameras running around over there, filming and interviewing people. We had a lot of big names over there, and we had one huge problem. This was not what we wanted of the event. It became a bit of a carnival. It went out of control. It was almost impossible to manage. We were a very small team, about 20-odd people who were running that. A much larger team runs the event over here. We were just 20 people. And that also, all of us had full-time jobs. And it was really, really difficult to handle an event of that sort. So we said, we have to make changes. For us, this chaos, and chaos is good, I know that, but this was chaos as an uncontrollable. We were not achieving anything anymore. Needed to go away. We needed to have more focus. So when we announced FOSDOT in 2006, which took place a short while ago, about a month and a half ago, we changed the focus of the event intentionally. More technology focus, and we almost got rid of all newbie talks. Now, this was very controversial. It got us into a hell of a lot of trouble. A lot of people set up and said, you are abandoning the newbies. What we said is, what are the lugs doing? They are doing precisely as they're teaching newbies about Linux. They're getting them started all year round. Plus, we are not the only event in town. We are not the only event in the country. There are lots of other events which happen across the country all year round. Why should we duplicate the efforts of all these people? So people who are new to Linux would attend one of those events or would attend a lug meeting, get started. And people who wanted to learn more about free and open source software, higher technologies, more advanced technologies, would come to FOSS.in. So our target was that we wanted to limit it to 1,500 people, exactly half of what we got last year. This had a lot of, the number itself had practical reasons. As I said, the place that we prefer to hold the event in is a convention space that can seat at the most 1,200 people. Plus we have a FOSS Expo outside where we expected about 300 odd people would be milling around. What happened is that on day one we got 2,000 people, and which played utter chaos with our planning because we had 1,500 people had pre-registered, and then another 500 odd walked in, which of course was total chaos as far as food is concerned. The entire management team of the event went without lunch that day. So, primarily because there wasn't any food anymore for us. Some of the speakers didn't get food to eat. It was that, it was really, really chaotic. So we have to fine-tune this as well. We have to make expectations clear. Some people came to the event and expected something that they wouldn't get. Some people came along and they wanted much more advanced stuff, which we could have offered if we hadn't taken on, lower-end talks. And probably next year, that's exactly what we are going to do, if the event is in Bangalore itself. One of the ways in which we can control the number of people who are going to attend the event to make sure that it's more focused is by actually taking it out of Bangalore. It just happens that Bangalore is the Silicon Valley of India. Anyone who is in IT is in Bangalore. By just moving the event to a nearby city like Mysore or Hyderabad or Chennai, we would probably be able to halve the number of people who would come and attend the event. But then we have to see, because finally it's not our decision where the event is. We did a poll actually, asked people, where would you like the event to take place? And of course you can guess what happened. Everyone wanted it in Bangalore again. So we had, over the years, a huge number of prominent international speakers. I'm quite proud of that list. Here's a partial list, starting with Alan Cox and Jonathan Corbett and Harold Wilte and lots of people. But what we are really proud about is not this list. Yeah. What? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't put it, I just cut and pasted it from the website. Hi, by the way. What we are really proud of is not this list. We are very grateful that these people came and spoke at the event. What we are really proud of is the fact that we had hundreds of Indian speakers. In fact, this year, we drove up the number of Indian speakers to such an extent that the opening keynote of the event, which is traditionally by some big name, last year, for example, we had Alan Cox opening the event. This year, we had a very prominent Indian FOSS contributor, Suparna Bhattacharya, coming and giving the opening keynote address. For us, this was a success basically on two fronts. One is we could do it and it was convincing. No one questioned the decision. And secondly, the effect of having an Indian speaker in India coming and opening the largest free and open source event in India and giving the opening speech had the effect of galvanizing a whole lot of people out there, because they said, it is possible, we can do it. Now, the problem we have had in India has been over all these years that we are seen as a people who consume free and open source software but don't contribute to it, which is not strictly true. A few months ago, I was here at a Wizards of OS conference, and I explained that when I first went out looking for contributors in India to any kind of free and open source software project, I could find 7. In a country of 1.2 billion people, I could find 7 contributors. It is only when I really started scraping really hard and started pushing it, I would find others who have also contributed. That scene has actually changed quite a lot right now. The fact, these hundreds of Indian speakers, many of these speakers are actual contributors themselves. And that is what FOSS.in had set out to do. If ever we wanted to ask, have we succeeded, we just have to look at the number of projects that have people from India, in India, involved in them today. For us, this is very, very important. Now, these hundreds of speakers came from academia, came from the government, came from the industry. It came from all spheres of life. And they were all sitting together, for many of the people, for the industry people, who may have been working with Linux for many years. It was a revelation, sitting over there and having this community effect thrust upon them. And many of them afterwards wrote and saying that I have worked with Linux for so many years, but I had never actually felt, being part of a community, but here I felt. Now remember, this is still an event that doesn't ram home ideology or freedom or anything else. Okay? It's still an event where people point a finger and say, you are bad because you don't go and teach people about the freedom. But what we still managed to do was get a sense of community across. And that is, for us, more important. If we can do one thing in a given amount of time, then this would be it. So what is the situation right now in India? As we stand, FOSS in academia is established. I mean, it's pretty hard to get away from free and open source software if you are in universities, if you are working in biotechnology kind of stuff, or if you're working with anything that requires any sort of IT or computing. So, I mean, that's a given. And the IITs, the Indian Institutes of Technology, and Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, all of them are filled with people who are using Linux throughout the place. 80% of the machines running in the Indian Institute of Science itself are all Linux or FreeBSD based. The state of FOSS in the industry is a bit undefined over here. Everyone is using it, but they're using it like a product. They're using it because they derive value out of that, but they don't quite understand what they're using. And this is the target that we have been getting in, so that they understand where it's coming from. This is not something where you spend money and you get something, and then if it doesn't work, you sue someone. So we have been trying to get industry to understand what this is once upon. Last year, when we renamed ourselves to FOSS.in, we actually ran into the problem that some sponsors backed out because they didn't want to be associated with the term free, because it was sending, apparently, the wrong message across to their customers. Because free as in gratis, okay? That was a concept that didn't go down very well with supposedly some of their customers and some of their clients. They actually backed out of that. But this year, the very same sponsors came forward and donated liberally to the event. Our event runs completely on sponsorship money. None of what happens at the event is paid for with money which comes from people who attend the event. The money they pay just goes towards feeding them. That's it. So the industry is beginning to wake up and understand what this whole FOSS concept is about. More importantly, the government is beginning to understand that. Once upon a time, we used to have this problem where people used to say, the government is not doing enough for free and open source software. They should make free and open source software mandatory. This is in 2002. 26th of December 2002, I attended a meeting in Delhi where there were actually people sitting at the table and pounding the table and saying the government should enforce the use of free and open source software within the government and all government divisions. And me and another friend of mine, Kishore Bhargav, were sitting over there as the sole representatives of the free and open source community of India. And we actually said we don't want that. Because the minute you do that, you're creating another monopoly. We don't want that monopoly. There was total chaos in the room. There were 80 big shot representatives of industry, academia, everything you can possibly think of the government. And the community was telling them that they didn't want to have exclusive status. What we told them is all we want is a level playing field. And because we took them so off guard, they actually asked us to submit recommendations on how to go about it. How does one create a level playing field? That report is, you can go and check on my site, atulchitnis.net. If you go in the writings part of it, you can download the PDF from there. Basically, we told the government, go on a functional basis. When you create your tenders, create functional tenders. Don't say, must be able to open Microsoft Word documents. Don't say, has to be able to run a Microsoft Windows or whatever. State functional requirements, and then evaluate all the offerings on that basis. And finally, evaluate on price. So since this was very fair, the government wanted to have applications that did certain things for them and would always do it for them. So they did that, and over time, today, if you look at tenders that come out from the government of India, they do not specify products anymore. They specify functionality. For us, that's pretty much of a victory. So if you list the successes we have gone through, we have increased awareness, naturally. That's what we started off with. And we have it across the country. Once upon a time, we were focused in small sections like in Bangalore, because it's the IT capital of the country, in Bombay, Mumbai, which is the commercial capital of the country, in Delhi, which is the political capital of the country. But because of what we have been doing, we have been reaching a whole lot of people across the entire country. In schools, in colleges, in companies, in governments, in industries, we have been reaching all over the place. We have seen increased use. If you go and look at the IT infrastructure in most companies, I already told you about that little report that Microsoft had commissioned, you will find that they're using Linux or FreeBSD servers throughout. Backends are typically all free and open source software based. Firefox is the preferred browser all over the place, which is a good thing. Internet Explorer doesn't work on half the sites that Indian companies are putting up, which is a bad thing, because we apparently are doing the same thing what was done to us a long time ago. But yes, there are a whole lot of people using stuff today, and they're beginning to ask questions. What is this stuff that I'm using? Where is it coming from? And that's where we actually go across and explain to them, this is where it comes from. Within my own company, Geodesic, I have for the past couple of months been dealing with a situation of multiple groups of developers who never talk to each other. They would work on their particular projects, but they would never work on each other. I rammed home the whole open source way of doing things. Mailing lists all over the place, get everybody to talk about everything, common repositories, everybody can have a look at everybody's code, everyone can contribute everywhere. It's unbelievable what's happening inside my own company. I mean, I sit back and I'm shocked and seeing the productivity going up there, and I'm supposed to expect it. Okay, and I'm still shocked. I'm surprised pleasantly. So we have increased use all over the place, academia, industry, government. We have something else to our credit that we are very, very proud of. The educational curriculum of India in technical colleges actually specified the use of Microsoft products. So you would give an exam which would say, write in brief how you would use Microsoft Word to write a document, boldface it, and then you had to describe what keystrokes you used and all that. You know, the kind of implicit marketing efforts. We had student ambassadors. It's all gone. We have managed to get the government of India to actually enforce the cleaning up of technical educational curriculum all across the country, down to high school level. You will not find any more curriculum in schools or colleges which specifies a product. For us, this is a big thing. We fought for years, and obviously there were big bucks against us. We still managed, and we didn't manage by going and standing and waving flags. We just went to proving that there was no need for them to do this. The other thing that we managed to achieve fairly recently was technical university projects. Now, if you are studying engineering in India, you have to do a project in your final year. I believe that's also the same in most places across the world. As of this year onwards, at least in the state of Karnataka and the state of Tamil Nadu, which is basically South India, you can do a FOSS project. You can participate in a FOSS project, and it will be deemed as being credit-worthy. You will get a credit for that. It will be the equivalent of you doing a standalone project. In fact, it has gone so far that the Technical University of the state of Karnataka has specified that students can do whatever project they want as long as they publish the final code under a free and open source license. If you don't get your credit. We didn't ask for them. It's their own savvy. They grew up to this. They began to understand this is good for them. So open source projects are now recognized. Let's quickly talk about failures. I'm getting frantic flashes from the back there. I've got only 10 minutes left. So let's quickly talk about some of the failures, because there are some as well. One of the things is, in a country filled with 1.2 billion people, we have more politicians than citizens, as far as the free and open source world is concerned. Everyone starts getting into the free and open source world by wanting to be RMS. Okay, so we have a lot of talk, and we have very little action. This is not a condemnation of RMS. He's doing his job, but we don't need other people to do his job. Okay, we need other people to sit and write code. And many people actually miss that point. For us, this is a big failure. We see people coming out of college and beginning to talk about free and open source software as if they have got a lifetime of experience behind them, which they actually don't. And I have seen the same thing happening in a lot of other places, including here today. So you don't just understand something because you've managed to install a copy of Linux or FreeBSD once. You don't understand the whole thing. You don't go around preaching. You have to build up your credibility. You have to build up your knowledge base. And you have to actually do something. You don't go around preaching to people, the only way to do FOSS is by writing code. No, you write code. You don't talk about it. The lugs are losing relevance in India. The Bangalore Linux user group, which used to be one of the largest, now exists only in cyberspace. The Bombay user group used to be another large one, only exists in cyberspace. And this is a malady that's spreading the country. Everyone is on the internet, but physically, very few people are meeting. In Bangalore specifically, a whole lot of people are working with free and open source technologies for the job's sake, not for the fun's sake. Now, this is something we are beginning to change, but as of right now, this is what the state is. There's a whole lot of closed source Linux happening, especially in Bangalore. This is people working on the Linux kernel, developing for the Linux kernel, bringing out innovations, but keeping them closed within their companies, never contributing back. There is lower student interest. People are more interested from the second year onwards of their 4-year course. They're more interested in how they can get a job. So they're learning Linux or they're learning about free and open source technologies because they want to get a job. But once they actually get into a job, they don't actually do anything any further. And we have got really bad politics going on over there. Now, this is something I don't want to talk about, but I mean, there is bad politics. Remember, the more people you get if the audience is large, there's likely to be someone who comes along and says, oh, there's a lot of eyeballs over here, I want to get involved. So we have a whole lot of bad politics going on as well. I'll not talk about those. Finally, there have been innovations in the country as well. We have not been just sitting over there and doing nothing. The thing that we are really well known for across the country, across the world right now, is our efforts in localization. We have in our country dozens and dozens of independent, different languages with their own scripts. And we have got people sitting over there under the aegis of the InLinux project, which I urge you to go and visit, where they are actually localizing they're localizing Linux, they're localizing applications, they're localizing all sorts of FOSS-related stuff, including documentation, in the local languages. This is quite a task. This is a huge task. And they have been so successful at it, they have been building their own tools. These tools are now being used by neighboring countries to do their localization. So this is partly this is an innovation that comes out of from India. We have inter-domain projects like the National Resource Center for Free and Open Source Software. Now this is important because this is a collaboration between the government of India, academia, which is a couple of universities in Tamil Nadu, and the industry working together and providing free and open source solutions and alternatives. And they're actually teaching teachers to go and teach free and open source software as a credit subject in technical colleges today. This, like I said, is a cross between the government, academia, and industry. Finally, we have a few devices which have come out. Some of these you may have heard about. One of them is the Simputer. Now, originally I had planned to spend a little time giving a little demonstration of what the Simputer can do, but I know I'm out of time. I know. The Simputer, which came out in 2001, was way ahead in terms of what it could do and what it had intended to do, but basically died because of bad marketing. Unfortunately, that's the case. There wasn't enough money involved, and there wasn't the government, which had initially pushed the project really hard. When it came to the push, preferred to go at that time the Microsoft way rather than go this way. So that project didn't die. The project is very much alive, and we are hoping to see some of the newer technologies and newer devices coming out sometime middle of next year. Now, I can confidently say that because one of the companies, Picopeta, there were two Simputer companies. One of these companies was acquired by the company I work for today, and the Simputer is actually part of my brief now. I know what's happening behind there, and believe me, the computer is far from dead. There's a whole lot of stuff coming out, but which I definitely can't talk about right now. We're a publicly limited company, and I'll have the stock exchange after me if I start talking about that. But I can talk, if anyone is interested, a little bit about what the computer has been doing and what it has been capable of. If you want to see what the computer looks like, you can do that also. Okay, that's it. I'm done. If you have any questions, and I know that I have seriously overrun. Yes? I've got 5 minutes still. So if anyone has got any questions, yeah. Hang on.
You're talking about industry and academia and the FOSS community in India in these, along these lines. I wanted to know what the importance is of civil society organizations or non-profit groups. Are there any? Are they working on projects? What are they doing?
Basically what you're talking about is non-government organizations,
That's
NGOs.
Right.
Now, there are tons of NGOs in India. In fact, there are probably more NGOs per square mile in India than you find anywhere else in the world. For simple reasons. I mean, India is considered to be one of the poorer countries, which is not strictly true, okay, but, well, we are considered one of the developing countries, which is better than having stopped developing. The NGOs, unfortunately, do not use free and open source software in India. And it's a big pain in the butt for us. The reason why they're not using it is because most of these are not Indian run organizations. They're foreign organizations. Organizations come from the US, come from Europe, and they are heavily funded by companies which are basically beholden to Microsoft. So they get a lot of free software, or they get what we call reduced price software. They also are honor bound because there are other projects happening elsewhere in the world which are actually funded by Microsoft. Microsoft is not as bad as we always make it out to be. So they are honor bound to actually use Microsoft software. Now, this has been actually brought up several times. It's been brought up in the parliament. It's been brought up in various forums. And why do the NGOs in India not use free and open source software when everyone else is using it? And the NGOs have actually put up their hands and said, look, this is the problem. We can't jeopardize things that are happening in the rest of the world. So, yeah, unfortunately, you've hit a very sore spot over here for us. Yeah, any other questions? Over there.
I have a quite similar question, but on another topic. So how important is the participation of especially commercial vendors for the success of the free and open source movement? How important is it that big commercial vendors actually use free software and support that and so on, and how important is it in specific for such vendors to show up as at a conference or at an event like FOSS.in?
Well, obviously it's important because they're the ones who have the money. Here's a shocking piece of news. Our event in 6 years has never been sponsored by any of the big names in open source. No Red Hat, no Novell. I mean, okay, they have once had partial representation. What Novell has, I think, in 2003 had a small sponsorship. Red Hat has never sponsored the event. Okay, so they are definitely not part of it. Names like IBM, you'll find them sporadically coming and contributing. They prefer going and sponsoring smaller events where they are big enough gorillas sitting over there, the 800-pound gorillas, so that they get a lot of mileage over there. If you look at the kind of sponsors we have been getting, you look at the sponsors we had this year, Sun Microsystems, my own company, there has been SpikeSource, there has been ABB, you know, the Swedish electrical giant ABB. They were showing robotic stuff over there, which was run with free and open source software, run using Python and whatnot. We have been having very unconventional sponsors, not sponsors you'd normally expect. Sun has been sponsoring our event even when they weren't open source yet. Okay, so we've had Intel coming. Intel sponsored us last year. But we haven't had IBM sponsoring our event in many years. HP sponsored our event for years, okay, and in the past few years has not actually shown up over there. Does that actually cause us to suffer, or does that cause the industry to suffer, or the awareness to suffer? I don't think so. I think basically people are making themselves look really stupid. A classic example, last year we had Alan Cox giving the opening keynote at our event. Okay, and Red Hat was not a sponsor of the event. So it's a bit weird over there. We have a whole lot of people who are contributing, who are helping out, the large computer companies, the large computer manufacturers, large software companies, because they know which side of the bread is buttered. All computer manufacturers in India also sell machines with Linux pre-installed on them in a perfunctory kind of way. So does that answer your question? Yeah. Any other questions before we get kicked off from here?
Actually, it's getting close, so
Okay.
last question, please.
You have my email address over there. Feel free to ask, and I'm here for the next, till the end of the event. So if you want to catch hold of me, want to ask questions about India, want to ask questions about this computer, feel free to catch hold of me. Thanks a lot.